Thursday, the 1st of October. Amazing how the year has run rather quickly. Good evening to you. Welcome to Agenda. We're live from the studios of TV3. My name is Matilda Asante Esiedu, and Agenda is brought to you in partnership with Simbins Furniture. Now, after 15 years of using the Millennium Development Goals to fight poverty, reduce hunger, disease, and promote development, world leaders at the just-ended UN General Assembly adopted what officials call, and this is a quotation, far-reaching and people-centered set of universal and transformative goals and targets. There are 17 altogether. But given that countries like Ghana met only 4 out of the 8 Millennium Development Goals, which is a follow-on to these Sustainable Development Goals, could the SDGs succeed where the MDGs failed? And how relevant will the SDG be to a nation like Ghana's development? That's what we're looking at tonight on Agenda. Let's meet our guests in the studio. We've got Mr. Dominic Sam. He's the country director of the UNDP here in Ghana. Also in the studios with us tonight, Dr. Grace Bediako, Senior Technical Advisor to the National Development Planning Commission, and Mr. George Osei-Bimpe, Country Director for Send Ghana. Lady, gentlemen, welcome. Thank you very much for making time to join us. So let me start with you, Mr. Sam. You've been busy at the UN having conversations about these new Sustainable Development Goals, but that obviously came out of the progress made, the MDGs, which had been running for the past 15 years. So let's talk a bit about that. Would you say that the MDGs introduced to reduce poverty, reduce hunger, promote development, achieve these objectives?
I think I can say, first of all, Tilly, thanks for inviting us here. I'm excited to be here with Grace and George. Let me just start by saying that the MDGs did achieve what it set out to achieve. The first thing is it showed us that when it set goals, you can achieve something. Because the MDGs was the first of internationally recognized goals. We do recognize that they were not that sophisticated or complex. Some people have referred to them as the minimal development goals. But I guess on the heels of the Millennium Declaration, there was really an urgent need for the world to prove that they meant something. So we had a group of experts who met, sat down, and came up with what I can call low-hanging fruits, a set of goals that were easy to understand and easy to achieve. But beyond that, I think that there have been lessons learned, really, from MDGs. And that's why the SDGs are much more sophisticated and complex, because the issues that we're dealing with, extreme poverty, inclusion, economic growth, are complex issues. And we need complex sets of goals to be able to achieve them. So I would say, yes, largely they have been achieved because...
So on a scale of 0 to 10, what percentage would have been achieved?
It depends. If you talk globally...
Globally, yes.
Globally, I would say really it's about 6 to 7%. Okay. But when you talk nationally, that's where you begin to see that the progress was largely uneven. But for me, beyond the numbers was the fact that for the first time in the international development architecture, we had a set of goals, that people actually bought into them, and that countries really internalized and set about implementing them, and that there were partnerships. So for me, that alone tells me that there was a good measure of success. But if it comes to the achievement of the various goals, I think largely it lifted billions of people out of hunger, billions poverty. So to a large extent, I can say there were some achievements.
So your expectations were met then?
Yeah, I think the expectations were largely met. Yeah.
Okay. Dr. Bediako, you are the technical advisor to the National Development Planning Commission. Ghana met 4 out of 8. Yes. Why? And maybe for the benefit of our viewers, I can just quickly go over. We're going to show that on the screen as soon as we're able to. But when we talk about the Millennium Development Goals, we're talking about 1, eradicate extreme poverty and hunger, achieve universal primary education, promote gender equality, reduce child mortality, improve maternal health, combat HIV/AIDS, malaria, and other diseases, to ensure environmental sustainability, and to develop a global partnership for development. That will come on your screens as we continue with the conversation. So, Dr. Bediako, Ghana achieved 4. Okay, so that's on your screens now. Ghana achieved 4 out of the lot. They say 1, 2, 3, and 8. Why?
Well, as Dominique said, you know, these were goals that we all aspired to achieve. It was the first time we had a collection of goals from different areas of policy. So understandably, there would be challenges. One would be resources. How would you allocate resources? You may not necessarily allocate all your resources to deal with the Millennium Development Goals per se, but you would try to achieve certain things. You will see that the ones that we seem to achieve were ones that we were tackling. So
as part of existing priorities,
exactly.
Anyway.
Poverty was an issue. We had social protection programs, and we have education has always been on our agenda. There have been several different policy interventions. And then you come to children's health. We were also dealing with that. Unfortunately, with maternal mortality, though something was already being done, I mean, like free delivery, it's perhaps it's too little.
It was too little?
Yeah, because...
So we didn't achieve that one?
No, we didn't achieve that because it takes more than just intervention at the delivery stage to change the odds of for survival. And then there were other areas in gender equality that we did not tackle. I mean,
did we even try?
That's the point, you know. I think we left things to happen with. If I say
that was not our
equality.
priority.
No,
we were more interested in lifting people out of poverty and ending hunger than we were about
gender equality is just too hard, and we needed to get more women interested in competing for positions. And we throw our hands up and say they are not, either the women are not there.
Or we don't give them opportunity.
We didn't give them opportunity. So we made a choice, and I think that one we did not really make a good effort to tackle. And so it's not surprising that we did not achieve it. And
environmental sustainability.
That's a tough one, because for us that is a big new area. We have challenges with sanitation. It's always been a challenge, and we didn't make a dent in that. I think that we really need to confront a lot of things when it comes to sanitation, which we didn't tackle. Environmental issues we have not also dealt with consistently. It takes a lot to deal with all the environmental concerns. And so, and then you come to statistics, for example. We don't have consistently good estimates on the indicators of the environment. We have water
and you would know
sanitation.
that as a former government statistician.
Yeah. So it's really, the other area we have talked about is the monitoring. We would see that if we went to the United Nations documents, every year there's a review, and a publication is produced at the United Nations Global Review. You see that we don't have enough statistics. So a lot of the reviews are based on United Nations agencies' estimates. Whether that reflects the reality or not.
On the ground.
Yeah. So we needed to add a few things also to the MDGs, like looking at statistics, because it was implicit in the targets that we needed to develop. Yes.
A matrix measure.
Yeah. But we did not have a strategy.
So it's possible then, from what you're saying, and that's a point I want you to address, help us address, George, that perhaps because we didn't develop the matrix to actually measure, it's difficult to know whether we achieved any at all, or if the 4 that we claimed that we did achieve, we actually achieved.
Yes, thank you very much, Matilda. I think first of all, we do not necessarily have on the failures, but it is important that we also analyze it to see how we are guided by lessons as we go into the implementation of the SDGs.
Okay.
There are problems with nationally aggregated or average data, and when data, I should say, it doesn't give you the spatial differences. For example, if you are talking about inequality, and when you aggregate it like that, it becomes a problem. And the point that Dr. Bediako is making is quite relevant in terms of the fact that we are not able to tell within even a district the differences that are happening within even Accra. What are the differences? I think that the problem with the initial integration of the MDGs into National Development Plan in itself is attributable to the fact that we were not able to achieve all. To what extent did government encourage, the decentralized structures, for example, to integrate the MDGs into their plans? I mean, the district.
But we've been eradicating poverty in Ghana for the longest time. Yeah. We didn't even need MDGs to do that, because we know we have poverty, and part of what a government is supposed to do is lift people out of poverty. Yeah,
the MDGs were the minimum that we could ever attain. And so if we could not attain the minimum, then you ask yourself why we couldn't attain the minimum.
Dr. Bediako talks about lack of finance. You're on the ground, in the communities. What did you see as the additional reasons why we didn't achieve?
I think that the point I was making about even how we did not initially anchor it on our decentralization system means that community ownership.
So it wasn't localized.
Exactly. Community ownership in itself was a problem. So if you did not build a momentum, around how citizens can demand from duty bearers at the local level in terms of living up to that expectation. So you left the assemblies, to do their own thing as if there was not a nationally defined guidelines for them to follow. That in itself is one. If you also do not address the systemic challenges in terms of how accountable the implementing agencies are to communities, to citizens, how do you know that the resources that are being used to implement the MDGs are actually bring out the returns it's supposed to bring? And so all those are problems. So citizens, on one hand, were not strategically positioned to demand duty bearers as to why and how they should use public resources to make sure that these services were provided to meet all the needs and aspirations of them. I mean, there are issues that you can talk about around, of course, I've mentioned the fact that even it took so much time for Ghana to begin to talk about. I can say that in Ghana, people started talking about it probably after 2006, when we had spent about 6 to the implementation. And it became,
so we didn't start early. That was part of the problem. We didn't localize it.
We didn't localize it. We didn't probably integrate it into the National Development Plan in a way that would have guided even those who are supposed to provide services, i.e. the assemblies, at the community level. So
to incorporate it into the activities. Yeah. Let me ask you, Mr. Sam Dominic. I've been wondering, even though I know it's not supposed to be for only poor countries, but it seemed to me that the MDGs and subsequently the SDGs, which we will address in a moment, are more looking at the day-to-day needs of countries, perhaps in Africa, in poorer parts of the world, where the governments may not have been focused on what the world leadership considers necessary essentials.
Yeah, if I can just quickly clarify that, because I think that's one of the key differences between the SDGs and the MDGs. The MDGs were really meant for developing countries, the least developed countries. That was the focus of the MDGs.
Like Ghana?
Yes, like Ghana and many other developing countries.
And Cameroon, where you come from.
Thank you so much. Yes, absolutely. So that was the focus of the MDGs. But the key difference with the SDGs is that they are global, they are universal, they are applicable to all the countries in the world. That is the key difference. And they will have to be localized, based on the realities of each country. It's always a fallacy when we tend to measure pass or fail. Let's just remember that different countries started at different levels.
Very well.
They were never, ever at the same level. So it's not as a race that we are running and country A ran faster than country B. But obviously there have been challenges, and George made reference to some of the challenges. And I think some of the lessons have been learned, and that's why the process of formulating the SDGs was quite different from the MDGs. That's why the content of the SDGs is quite different from the MDGs, and that's why the posture of the SDGs is quite different from the MDGs.
So let's talk about the SDGs.
Yes.
I've seen a tall list of 17 things or ideals that we're supposed to achieve. Why has that become necessary? Why are we moving from MDGs to SDGs? And what exactly are these SDGs?
I think if I can just take us back a little bit
Sure.
to the Millennium Declaration, that really set the basis of the world trying to create a certain aspiration for what world we need for the 21st century. And most people always fail to read that Millennium Declaration. It is a wonderful document, and I advise really people to actually read it, because that document was a document that came at a pivotal moment in our history as we move into the 21st century, in a period where there's been unprecedented wealth creation and technology advancement. And there was a common feeling that with the level of the wealth that's being created and technology, that nobody should go to bed being hungry, and that nobody should not be able to have access to health, to education. So that was the essence of the Millennium Declaration. But unfortunately, the MDGs had to follow quickly on the heels to show that the countries meant business. And we started at a very low base with what some call the Minimal Development Goals. That's how some people have described
Describe the
MDGs.
MDGs.
But again, it was a good starting point. We've learned from that. And we've understood that if we really have to address and capture the spirit of the Millennium Declaration, we really have to be bold and we have to be ambitious. If we have to deal with the three key elements of sustainable development, which is economic growth, which is social inclusion, which is protecting the environment, and these are all complex issues. We needed a much more aggressive set of goals to be able to address the totality of the issues. And that's why for us it's important that we understand that the 17 goals are not independent of each other. They are all related to each other. And therefore the way we implement them need to be in an integrated manner to make sure that we don't lose the essence. And I always tell people a simple analogy. If you go to the doctor and you're sick, give you a composition of medication to take, 6 tablets a day, 7 tablets a day, you may have a challenge. They don't have enough money to be able to get those 6 tablets. But the answer is not taking 2 tablets and forgetting the other 5. But we need to figure out how to really to take the whole cocktail if you really have to cure yourself and get yourself rid of that illness. So if we have to capture the spirit and the aspirations in the Millennium Declaration, we have no other way but to see how we really capture, focus our minds to implement the 17 goals, albeit in a 15-year time span. Okay. Understanding that not all countries come from the same level of development, understanding that countries will have to prioritize one or the other of the goals depending on where they are in their development spectrum. And I think it's important that we understand that.
Okay, and again, for the benefit of our viewers, there are 17 of them. I'll just run through them quickly. It says, end poverty in all its forms, everywhere. End hunger, achieve food security, improve nutrition and promote sustainable agriculture, ensure healthy life and promote well-being for all at all ages, ensure inclusive and equitable education, and promote lifelong learning opportunities for all. 5, achieve gender equality and empower all women and girls. This is by 2030. Ensure availability and sustainable management of water and sanitation for all. That's 6. 7, ensure access to affordable, reliable, sustainable, and modern energy for all. I'm sure Ghana needs that very much. Promote sustained, inclusive, and sustainable economic, full and productive employment, and decent work for all. Build resilient infrastructure, promote inclusive and sustainable industrialization, and foster innovation. Reduce inequality within and amongst countries. Make cities and human settlements inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable. 12, ensure sustainable consumption and production patterns. 13, take urgent action to combat climate change and its impacts. 14, conserve and sustainably use the oceans, seas, marine resources for sustainable development. 15, protect, restore, and promote sustainable use of terrestrial ecosystems, sustainably manage forests, combat desertification, halt and reverse land degradation, and halt biodiversity loss. 16, promote peaceful and inclusive societies for sustainable development, provide access to justice for all, and build effective, accountable, and inclusive institutions at all levels. And the 17th one, strengthen the means of implementation and revitalize the global partnership for sustainable development. We're still on agenda. We're looking at the newly introduced Sustainable Development Goals. There's 17 of them, and if you click on each one of them, some have as many as 10 sub-themes that we're supposed to achieve around the world. We're going to take a short break. When we return, what I want us to look at is what and how these can be achieved. For instance, it says end poverty in all its forms everywhere. By 2013, eradicate extreme poverty for all people everywhere, currently measured as people living on less than $1.25 a day. How exactly is this going to be achieved? Stay with us, we'll be right back. Back to agenda, we're looking at the newly introduced strategic development goals by the UN and for nations around the world. Presidents around the world, including our very own, adopted this on Sunday, so this is applicable. So, Dr. Bediako, having read all that, it seemed to me, end poverty in all its forms, everywhere, seemed to me, from where I sit, that this is unrealistic. Is it, I mean, are these goals realistic? Can they be achieved?
Well, we have to remember that, as in the MDGs, poverty had a level. We were trying to eradicate extreme poverty. It's true that poverty as we know it, I mean, it's, as someone once said, I mean, if you eradicate extreme poverty, you still have poverty, because it's relative. You know, what I think as a global community we do not want is really people in abject poverty outside the margins of society, because they can barely make it. And you will see that end hunger too is an issue of, it's not give people food till they overeat. But really, there's some basic things that you don't even want to entertain in your society, in your community. So it is achievable, and we'll see that they are connected, as Dominique earlier said. If you are ending poverty, you are ending hunger, you are achieving, you're seeking to achieve food security. You are tackling fundamental issues that would really enhance your potential to achieve many other things, right? So it is achievable. We have to, it is really the coordinated effort and synchronizing some of these actions that we would have to take. Prioritizing is one of those. And we'll say that when you consider our medium-term framework,
Ghana.
Yes, okay. The Ghana's medium-term framework. Almost all these are there. Okay. They are there, and many more. You know, so
so they're not over-ambitious.
No, they are not. I mean, if you were to
end all forms of discrimination of women and girls everywhere in the world by 2030.
In your community, in your country.
Okay, let's hear Mr. Sam. I'll come to you in a minute.
If I can just come back on that, let me just premise by saying these are universal goals, and different countries are at different levels.
Very well.
In terms of where they are in achieving these goals. For some, it's going to be a long shot. For some, it's going to be a short. And if we're able to have extreme poverty in Ghana, there's no reason why in an additional 15 years we cannot end extreme poverty. So when you first read, they may sound very ambitious, but when you drill down, you can begin to see the potential and the possibility of reaching these goals. Again, if we have to capture really the aspirations that the world leaders represented in the Millennium Declaration, we needed bold action. We needed an ambitious agenda. We cannot go for mediocrity. We cannot go for mid-range shots. We really have to go there, mobilize the kinds of partnerships and resources that are needed, and capture the imagination of our people to understand that each person has a stake in making sure that we work towards achieving these goals.
Let me come to you, George. There's 17 of these goals. In the first 8, we barely achieved 4. And if you look at it critically, even the 4 that we achieved is just somewhere. We didn't really achieve it in line with the set UN standards. For instance, maybe I can give you an example. Infant mortality, for instance.
Child mortality, yeah.
If you fell from 57 to 53 per 1,000 lives, live births, and yet the UN target was 22 per 1,000. So we obviously didn't fully achieve it. And now we have 17. Where should we focus on? Given what you understand, you are working in the communities of our major needs are right now as a country.
Okay, thank you. I think the first point that I want to make before I go on is that we have the flexibility as a country to localize the goals.
Sure.
So in our context, what do we need?
That's what I want us
Very
to
good.
focus
So
on.
it comes to the issues of prioritization. Immediately, if you ask anybody, people are interested, for example, in job opportunity, employment issues.
Creation.
The thing that you want to talk about is youth development.
But shouldn't you eradicate poverty and hunger
well, of
and
course, this
be
is one
healthy
of them.
before you can look for a job?
No, poverty, you see, poverty in its dimensional form looks at access to health, employment, education, all the basic necessities. And so poverty is no longer going to be measured in terms of income.
Living on one,
that is only just one aspect of it. So one could be living on more than that, but if you do not have access to have affordable quality healthcare, that is problematic. You also want to, Ghana would want to address issues of urbanization. We live in, for example, those of us in Accra, you see how we are managing Accra and the kind of, if you like, repentantization culture that we are creating. In other words, we are importing rural lives into Accra. And so people live in Accra, but they are not of Accra. Urbanization.
Into our cities, not just Accra.
Yeah, one of them, yeah. Urbanization is one critical area we need to address. And I think that one important area that Ghana should be focusing on is issue of building an inclusive society and to make sure that social protection for women and children are taken seriously. Because you cannot talk about elimination of all forms of discrimination against women without providing the social safety net for those vulnerable groups, especially women and children. And this is very, very important. Another critical area you would want to look at is the environment. The environment is very, very important.
Which we didn't achieve in the MDGs.
Exactly, because that's one of the areas we didn't do so well.
We didn't achieve.
Well, it didn't do well at all. Let me put it that way. But I think that we need to question ourselves as to what it takes to achieve this once we make the decision on the priority areas. And I think the first point that we need to...
so you're talking about resources now?
Yes. That's the first point we need to address is, do we mobilize domestic resources?
Okay.
It is very, very important that even though we may need domestic, public and private resources, but we have to begin to see how as a country we use our resources efficiently. Because it seems that the way we have been using resources in this country doesn't provide us the results that we need. That is one. And that is why in my opening statement, I talked about systemic issues. If we can address governance issues so that the duty bearers begin to use resources efficiently, we can begin to also explore opportunities for mobilizing more resources. But of course, we also live in an international community. How do we contribute to a global financial architecture that allows developing countries like Ghana to mobilize more resources. I'm talking about how do you curb illicit financial flows. We know that many multinationals in this country are riding at the back of some of these loose global architecture we have to siphon out monies out of them.
Okay,
And
that I cannot verify because I know
I can give you a simple statistics. In 2012 alone, about 66 or so, 67 billion were siphoned out of Africa.
And what's the source of that?
The source is a recent, only yesterday, a report that was released by the eminent panel chaired by Kofi Annan.
Okay.
Yeah, so I can give you the report.
So that's Africa.
Only this is 2012.
Okay.
I do not know, I do not have the facts in Ghana, but I also know, for example, in Ghana, many of the corporate, the multinationals do advanced tax planning. People are doing advanced tax planning. What it simply means is that before the year end, they have determined how much money they are going to pay in taxation.
Because they would have determined how much money they will be making.
That is wrong, because you don't know that in reality that is how much you make. So they pay that whether they make less or more.
Okay.
So that in itself is problematic.
So that's from what you see, that's one of the sources where we can mobilize
because whether
resources.
we like it or not, per our status as a lower middle income country, we will have to depend largely
on our internally generated funds.
And we have to also put in mechanisms to put pressure on duty bearers to begin to use our monies judiciously.
Let me come to you, Mr. Sam, and then I'll come to Dr. Bediako. So the UN brought world leaders together, and you've created these lofty ideas of goals that we have to achieve, laudable as they are. Did you also think about how these were going to be funded?
Yes. Within the framework of the SDGs, there's goal 17 that talks about partnerships.
Mm-hmm.
And Joy's allusion to the importance of domestic resources. Actually, we've been having the UN also set up what they call the international financing conferences, and the third one took place in July in Addis Ababa. And
financing for
development.
Okay.
And in that conference,
which would cover the sustainable development
in that
goals.
conference, there was the Addis Ababa Action Agenda that was adopted that emphasized really the need for domestic resource mobilization as a key source of funding for the SDGs.
So that's
but
one.
Also talked about the need for increased ODA, official development assistance, especially to least developed countries. But the key here is that we should be able to build the partnerships that are required to mobilize both private and public resources as well as national and international resources.
So let's look at Ghana, for instance, because I'd like for the benefit of our viewers that we localize it. We're in a country where we have huge budget deficits, overruns. We know that we never have sufficient revenue raised, even though we set ourselves the targets to achieve them. So how does a country like Ghana, with the challenges that it has, the financial constraints, go about beginning to tackle these 17 goals, or whichever ones we choose to prioritize?
I think, first of all, there has to be a robust national conversation on how are we going to finance the Sustainable Development Goals.
Should we also have a national conversation on which ones we choose as important?
Let me just take it further, because this conversation had already started.
Very well.
Where there is a committee that was set up that look at Ghana's contribution into the International Conference of Financing for Development. I remember the last time I met George was in Elmina, and there was a pool of really wonderful colleagues, both government, private sector, and civil society, that started looking at these issues of how Ghana can finance its the Sustainable Development Goals. And obviously, a middle-income country is going to be much more difficult to mobilize increased official development assistance, and Ghana will have to rely much more on its domestic resource mobilization as well as those other funding instruments that it can generate as the middle-income country. But again, the question is even more dire for middle-income countries like Ghana than for less developed countries, where obviously
they will get grants.
Much more opportunity for official development assistance, that's what I call grants. And there has to be need for greater transparency in policy options, in the funding instruments that are applicable, to make sure that the domestic resources that we have, that there are efficiency gains in revenue generation and efficiency gains in budget allocation and implementation. George made reference to the issues of illicit financial flows, to the issues of corruption, and to the issues of really predictability and resources. But there has to be a national conversation, just like there will be a conversation on localized the SDGs.
Dr. Bediak, you are the technical advisor to government. I'm sitting here looking at where we are as a nation and our resources, and I'm thinking, this is probably never going to happen. Maybe you can tell us something different.
Well,
do we have what it takes to set about achieving these targets? Do we have the political will? Do we have the financial muscle? Do we have the desire?
I'm sure we all remember, because we've just started that conversation about the long-term development plan.
The 40-year development plan?
The 40-year development plan. First, as I indicated, the SDGs are already situated in our policy framework. The Ghana Shared Growth and Development Agenda, which is now being implemented and will end in 2017. What it means is that we as a country already determined that these were important among many other things, and that we would seek resources to implement them. So now we have to really think about how we achieve what we've already set out to achieve, because it's not new. Maybe targets that may seem different in one case than another. For example, in the SDGs, we're looking at quality of education. In our GSGDA, it has to do more with basic numbers, you know. So we have to reconcile that. But quality is the way many of us want to go. There's also, now with the 4-year development plan, we have an opportunity to further integrate these SDGs into that plan. I know that what we are doing is to invite people to contribute in terms of ideas and aspirations. And I think a few of what George was mentioning at the beginning fit in very well with some of the things we are looking to the public to provide for the long-term development plan. In the same way, when we those ideas, this is a concrete set of goals and targets that we have committed to, and so we would integrate into the plan. So the whole financing framework will be considered in this context, because we won't have a 40-year plan without thinking through
how to pay for it. So from where you sit then, would you say this 17-point Sustainable Development Goals would be infused into our 40-year National Development Plan? And would that be key to sustainable development for a country like Ghana?
Yes, they're to be situated there because it's part of the commitment and the aspirations. We had representation at the global level. We in every meeting, His Excellency was there when joined the 193 countries to adopt this. So definitely we will situate it there. The issue is how we now go about as a country to implement this. And what I might add is, for the 40-year development plan, issues like infrastructure, which would facilitate some of the achievements that we seek to pursue, will be considered. So the SDGs will have a broader context within which to operate, or within which we will pursue these goals. And we will be in a good position to achieve this because it will be situated in the 40-year development plan, where some of the issues, soft issues, attitudinal change that we must have to tackle some of these.
Will be addressed.
Yes, and then fiscal planning and a whole lot of issues will be addressed and would definitely facilitate our achievement of some of these.
Okay, 1 minute and then I have to
yes,
take a break.
At least for once, I'm quite optimistic.
Why? What's your basis?
No, because at least, unlike the MDGs, processes leading up to the SDGs have been quite participatory.
Elaborate.
Yeah, quite, because at least civil society has been involved, the private sector, at least those who care have been involved. And so that gives me some sense of optimism. I think the point, what we need to emphasize is what will be an approach that will ensure that, for example, we anchor the implementation on our decentralization framework. Because it is quite disheartening to see that we talk about decentralization, yet you get people from the center going to the periphery to implement bigger projects. And when you question them, what they say is that they don't have the capacity. For how long will we be hiding behind capacity constraints to say that we will not allow the very system that we have developed to work? If people can move from the center to go to the periphery to implement, push those people there to go and work in those assemblies, for example,
and get the jobs
get the
done
capacity
from within.
And that is where you also begin to build accountability mechanism. Because if we do not watch and demand, probably we may succeed in raising a lot more money or resources, but the use of it will end up bringing us the results that doesn't match the effort that we have put in.
Okay, if you've just joined us for an agenda, we're looking at the newly introduced Sustainable Development Goals that world leaders sign up to today, and looking at how Ghana can benefit, how we can take advantage of it for sustainable development. Agenda is brought to you in partnership with Simbins Furniture, and Simbins Furniture have a special sale on now. Buy one room furniture set and get selected but limited dining room sets at 50% off. For a living room set, you get 1 3-seater, 1 2-seater, 1 armchair, 1 center table, 2 coffee tables, 2 table lamps, 1 free area rug. Go for quality, for style, and for uniqueness. See Simbins first. Call Simbins on 0244 667 790. Simbins. See Simbins first. I want us to look at how to localize it, because I know George has talked about it quite a bit. So let me start with you, Mr. Sam. Okay, let us take a break. We'll come and address that real quickly. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Yeah, welcome back. We're looking at the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, which have 169 proposed targets and 304 indicators to show compliance. We want to look at how we'll localize it and then quickly look at the benchmarks. You were making the point of how we're going to localize it, Mr. Sam.
Let me just start by really, first of all, recognizing Ghana for having contributed immensely in the initial consultations in setting up the SDGs, both in the why consultations in terms of the content and the how consultations in terms of the implementation framework. I think that overwhelming participation really will facilitate the ownership and the acceptance of the...
At the government level?
Yes.
Okay.
Both government and also civil society. There was
Okay.
immense participation of civil society.
Okay.
Not only at the national level, but also at the regional level.
Now, how do we break it down?
So now that the goals are here, we're waiting for the colleagues who are still out there in New York, that went to support to take it over the final hurdle, the adaptation. I think once they are back with the leadership of the NDPC, we'll look forward to engaging in a consultation in terms of how we then localize the MDGs. I know there are some lessons learned when we had the conversations on the how. I hope those lessons would come in now into the concrete localization of the MDGs, of the SDGs, the whole conversation about data, what indicators, what M&E framework. I think all this will be important, and how this fits into then the medium-term plan and also the vision is working on. So we are looking forward to really support that process. But the only thing I can say is that the fact that Ghana was really ahead of the curve in terms of participating in shaping and creating the goals, that really that buy-in, that ownership is already there reflected. If you listen to the president's statement at the General Assembly, there were already the bravado in terms of embracing really these goals and running with them. So the political will, you can say, clearly is there. But the challenge will still be, how do we continue to create an enabling environment really to make sure that the goals are not only domesticated, but implemented on some of the systemic issues that George mentioned earlier. I hope those will come back in terms of boisterous debate in terms of how we begin to address those issues, because without addressing those issues, it will be difficult to say, well, we're going to have a successful implementation, even though we have that buy-in.
Dr. Bediako, he's talked about, Ghanaians are good at going to conferences, making speeches, but practically, how are we going to localize this? You're from the NDPC and you're a technical advisor. If the president asked you for direction, which I'm sure he will, how should we go about it, bearing in mind the lessons from the MDGs?
Well, there are several tracks. One is when we look at the implementation, we need to bring it down to the lowest level of implementation of administration, with government administration. So far, it's in some cases it's the district, and when you get to education and health, you go below that. We will have to get the message to all these levels. Also, the need to have the capacity to monitor and evaluate at the same levels of implementation. So we need to build the capacity of ourselves so that we collect the correct information and we are able to disaggregate to that level. We depend so much on surveys, for example, and sample surveys. And for the SDGs, these will not do it. We will not, with the surveys, we can only disaggregate to the regional level. And we want to know if you are going to eradicate poverty in all its forms everywhere, you need to be able to assess whether at the community level you have reached.
At the household level.
At the household level. And so administrative data is the next stage of we have to tackle when we look at the monitoring side. The other issues are how we as citizens will involve ourselves in the implementation. There are issues that directly affect us. We have the sanitation, water, and these are things that we have to implement in some way. We need to know what source is good and what is not, and we need to know what is good hygiene, what is good sanitation, and the education, the sensitization has to reach that level.
Okay.
And, yeah.
George, I want you to address, okay, you wanted to make a point.
Yes, I think that...
But tie this into it, into localizing it. What can the local people themselves contribute?
Okay, thank you. So I'll try to unpack the meaning of...
We have 3 minutes.
Yeah.
In fact, we have 2 minutes.
Okay, in two ways.
And you have 1 minute.
In 2 ways. And the first one is the fact that local government have to be made responsible for the implementation of it. That is one clear way of localizing it. Okay. The second one is what Dr. Bediako already talked about. How do we make local government to monitor progress at subnational levels? And this implies that building the institutional human resource capacity. It is very important that we invest in data capture.
Okay, she talks about that.
So
what about benchmarking and timelines?
Yeah, I think that the point about how do local, citizens or people be part of the localizing effort. And I've already made reference to the fact that when we have done all this, we have addressed all these structural issues. At the end of the day, we need to get the citizens to know, understand, and own it. And then build a system of accountability for duty bearers to know that they use resources and they implement plans in the interest of the people. It calls for reorientation, attitudinal change on the part of duty bearers, so that when citizens, those of us in civil society, are going to take it upon ourselves to mobilize constituencies around how to monitor the implementation, gather the necessary...
And how to contribute.
And how to of course, contribution is in terms of how we become responsible citizens, changing our attitude and so on, paying our taxes and so on and so forth. That is one side. But then how to also contribute in terms of playing that watchdog role to make sure that the resources, the little ones that we get, whether from domestic or international, are used
judiciously applied. Final word to you, Mr. Sam, on benchmarks and timelines.
Well, thank you, Matilda. I think George has said it all. 15 years will come and go by very quickly. These targets and indicators would really have to be reflected in national plans, and the budgets allocated accordingly. And there has to be closely monitoring, really, especially on the budget side, which we don't see very often. Greater alignment on the planning and budget is important. And I think finally, really, that ownership that goes down there, I think is key, because without that, we'll not be able to make it. But I just want us to really celebrate for once the SDGs, because this has been a huge, huge achievement. 2015 will go down as the penultimate year in history where we're able to put together a robust international architecture, starting with the July conference in Addis Ababa that came out with the Addis Ababa Action Plan on Financing. Again, last week in New York with the approval of the SDGs, and in December with the Conference of Parties, that hopefully we can have a solution for the climate change.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That was Mr. Dominic Sam, Country Director, UNDP. In the studios also with us, Dr. Grace Bediakum, Senior Technical Advisor at the National Development Planning Commission, and Mr. George Osebimpe, Country Director for SEND Ghana. Many thanks to you for joining us. We'll see you again next week.